The blast through that monster leg of the Southern Ocean was pretty impressive. But then to have a scorching trip across the Atlantic over the top of Scotland in which this boat set a new world record was truly impressive. And it's what's made talking to the crews here in Aarhus all the more impressive, because they have got some stories to tell. But before we get on to that, we thought it'd be a good idea to come out and have a little taste. Well, we've just been doing some speed runs in the Pro-Am side of the import sessions that go on here, and it is absolutely fascinating. We hit about 22 knots, which was our top speed, which is not a massive amount, obviously, compared to what these boats are capable of, but it does give you a reminder, or certainly a reminder for me, as to just how extraordinary the motion is on these boats. Once you get to 20 knots, the bow lifts up and the whole boat starts to, you can feel it springing off the foil to leeward. It's quite extraordinary. I'd love to experience it at 30 knots, but anyway, there we go. That was good fun. But to find out really what it's like, I spoke to Abby Ehler, who was on board for leg 5. That was a bit of a leg, wasn't it? I mean, if you had to put it on a scale of 1 to 10, how uncomfortable was that?
It was definitely off the scale on uncomfortable levels. I would say almost on a par, if not worse than leg 3, which was the long Southern Ocean leg. It was just a brutal leg non-stop, you know, even negotiating the import section of the leg in Newport Harbour. And then we were straight into hard reaching conditions, and that reaching on these boats is really quite horrific. It's that skimming stone, you know, the dun 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 dun, which makes living on board very hard. Obviously great for setting records, as we found out, but yeah, brutal to live on board. And then it kind of just kept going. The pressure was on in terms of the tight racing, and then of course negotiating coastlines. And the last 48 hours, really there wasn't a lot of sleeping. We were kind of trying to push the whole time and trying to catch 11th hour, and then had a militia breathing down our necks, so a very intense leg.
Was it exciting?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's exciting because the pressure was on, and we had a few technical difficulties on board, which with our wind gear, which meant we were without electronics for a lot of the leg. So I would say exciting, but in an excitement as in the pressure and you know, just having to think outside the box a lot, rather than perhaps fun excitement.
Well, that's sort of why I was asking, really, because what it sounds like from talking to some of the others is it was so intense from the minute you picked up that front, just off the start, basically. It was full on. You just couldn't stop. Yeah,
it was. For as soon as obviously the goal was to cross that front and to stay on the right side of it, and that meant keeping the pressure on speed-wise, and then obviously the conditions were great for going fast, and it was really a chance to push the boat. But equally, you know, where do you stop pushing? Trying not to break stuff, and we've obviously had a bit of damage to things like our rudders, which we think is coming about because we're sailing the boat fast. It was quite interesting having Charles Caudrelier on board, because for him, I guess he's used to going a lot faster, and so for him 30 knots felt quite slow. So we're definitely, from leg 1, I seem to remember we were pulling the brakes on when we were reaching 30 knots, and on this last leg that got blown out the window.
Yeah, but he cheats. He's doing it in a 132-foot trimaran that's flying above the water. But I mean, I joke, but I mean, he's obviously got IMOCA experience as well. And what did he think? Because I mean, no one until this race started really knew what an IMOCA was capable of, fully crewed. So for him, who's got the solo experience, what was his view of it?
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think our barriers that we'd reached as a crew from our experience over legs 1 to 5, Charles doesn't have that, and so kind of came with a fresh game and really was looking to push the limits further. And I think even looking at our competitors as well, they were pushing more than before. So just having to match that or better them, to know that you got to stay up with the pack or beat the pack. There was the level has definitely got higher, and I think Charles coming in with that sort of ungauged knowledge, he was just looking to push the boat more, which is kind of what we needed, but unfortunately not quite enough.
Do you think he'll go back? He's gone back to France and told the friends that he chooses to tell, you need to look at this. This is something else. Do you think the buzz is going back to the west coast of France, that there's a lot being learnt right now?
I think for sure. I mean, this race will be a huge gold mine in terms of data, in terms of performance. You know, the fact that you're really pushing the boat to the red line, we're breaking stuff, we're fixing stuff. You're not going to find that line, I don't think, when you're racing a boat on your own, and just having that extra sets of eyes, extra sets of hands, really just finding that new limit of the boat and different ways to sail the boat, new ideas. It can only be value that will have a massive impact on when they go back to sailing solo for something like the Vendée Globe.
Do you think it would change deck layouts and configurations as well? Do you think, I mean, it's tempting to think that with a full crew on board, you may, as a solo sailor, be looking at it thinking, well, I can't possibly do this on my own with the configuration as it is, but if I had this purchase system or that system, I could. Do you think that's the mindset at the moment?
I think so. There's the setup on our boat where we've got the 2 pedestals. It seems to work exceptionally well when you've got what we call full crew. It means you can have 2 people in the pit while 1 person's on the bow. So the setup, potentially was going to modify from that solo mindset to how can we make this pit work better with 2 people in it, maybe 3 even. So I think it's much of a muchness, isn't it? It's down to preference, but we've definitely seen the value of being able to operate the pit with more than 1 person in a comfortable way and gets max power out of manoeuvres.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned that you lost your wind instruments, and it wasn't just your primary one, you lost your secondary one as well, didn't you, from the sounds of it? That must have been very hard to sail the boat manually. I mean, paint the picture for us. What was it like?
Yeah, so basically, I mean, in sailing, we're heavily reliant on wind instruments. They give us all the data that we need for sailing angles, our boat speed, what sail selection. So really, without that information, it meant that our autopilot was set on compass mode, so just on a heading. So you're having to drive the compass a lot more, or drive the pilot a lot more in terms of the feel of the boat. And just not having that, knowing how much breeze we were in or what angle we were sailing, and having to sort of stick your head out a lot more and go back to basics and looking at the water, looking at the clouds around you, and just trying to make a call on, things like whether we should have ballast in or, how much keel we should have. So it really was back to basics and just not knowing if you're in lifted pressure or, a breeze increase, or you're being headed or the breeze has just dropped. It's just exceptionally hard, and we were able to kind of benchmark a little bit when we had other boats in AIS range. But those simple things around sail choice, how to trim the boat is exceptionally hard without the wind gear.
Before the race started, Paul Mayer on Biotherm said to me, I asked him about being late, being the last boat into the race, and he was saying, he said, things are going to break. He said instruments are going to fall apart, and we know that, but we don't worry about that because we're French and we're used to sailing boats that are broken. We just get on with it. I mean, those are sort of effectively what he said. Do you think that was the mood on board your boat?
I think ultimately sailing is a mechanical sport. It's a technical sport. You're never going to get through Scot-3 without anything breaking, and that's part of the challenge on an offshore race, is how you fix things, what spares you carry on board, where do you draw the line, do you take the kitchen sink or not? So that's part and parcel of it. So I think, up until leg 4, where unfortunately the rig came down, we'd been really lucky with breakages and had managed to sort of fix stuff as we went along, but I think that's the nature of the sport, isn't it? And as we said at the beginning, this part of this race is pushing the boats perhaps more than what they would when they're sailing them single-handed. And again, that's it's grabbing data about what the braking limits are, so that they're going into the Vendée Globe even better prepared than without this race experience.
And following on from that, have you found that you've been doing less repairs, fewer repairs on this last leg? Are things starting to settle down? And
I wouldn't necessarily say things have settled down. Different things start to break, and I would say that concurs with any of my previous races. It's, one leg it might be pumps that decide to give up, and on the next leg it's sails that give up. I think that really is just part of this race, is that everything is built around weight, and we're no different to a Formula One car. You're always trying to shave down weight where you can, and eventually parts will reach their braking strain either through the working load or just through the wear and tear that's built up over the race, and you can't always catch everything. So again, it's a massive learning curve with these boats being so new, and technology is moving so fast.
you talk about shaving the weight down, and that's always been the traditional way, isn't it, to sort of improve performance. But I wonder now how much the human factor comes into play with the performance of the boats. How much of the boat's been held back by what you just physically can or can't do on board?
Yeah, I think it's unknown territory in terms of pushing. You could keep pushing and pushing, but it's just that fear that something will give up, and as we've seen, things do give up. The human element, yeah, it definitely makes the living uncomfortable on board, but I think it's not going to last forever, and eventually you'll get a let up and we can check things on the boat, you can get some decent sleep and rest. But certainly over a longer period, and I think I said that after leg 3, if it had been low pressure after low pressure, similar to the last edition of the race, I think it would have been a very different story at the end of that leg with people and boats. Really? Yeah, for sure.
And what is especially difficult? I mean, it sounds like moving around the boat is not only difficult, it's extremely risky.
Yeah, you have to be holding on when the boat's at any speed. You have to be holding on, just because the deacceleration when you bump into the next wave is huge, and there's no warning about it happening. I think dissimilar to the planing boats, where you can kind of feel the nature of the boat and you feel like your acceleration, and then you're perhaps going to nose into the wave. This is just, you're doing such a constant fast speed that you never know when that deacceleration is coming, and if you're not holding on, then you're literally going to get thrown through the boat. So yeah, just trying to hold on. When you're obviously trying to get your wet weather gear on and off, doing it one-handed is a challenge. Cleaning your teeth is a challenge, cooking a meal is a challenge, and therefore, people go without food because it's sometimes too hard to cook. So it's all those basic things on board that suddenly become almost in the too hard basket.
Well, I'd scrub out cleaning your teeth for a start for a week, but my mother would be horrified to hear that. How much do you think that, someone I was talking to this morning actually was saying, one of the guys on the 11th hour, actually Amory, who obviously got a rather unpleasant, uncomfortable shoulder injury after their collision, but he was saying that he will wear or wants to wear a harness a lot of the time, and he was describing it to me as a harness the other way around, so it's actually on his back to stop him being thrown forward.
Yeah.
Is that a common thing, or are we going to see more of that, do you think?
Certainly on board we wear body protection, similar to what they would wear for mountain biking or dirt biking. Often if you're going forwards in the boat down below and you need to stack, we'd be wearing these rugby skull caps just to protect your head. And things like we've got some netting down below which would save a fall through the cockpit, or through the down below living area. So there's definitely provisions, but yeah, I think it's almost maybe that's something for the future, is just the technology of how we make living on board easier, safer. That's something will just evolve over time.
Someone said to me, I can't remember when it was now, a few months ago, they'd said that making a cup of tea was now a tactical decision because you had to slow the boat down to do it.
It's not, yeah.
Talking of tactical decisions, so now you are currently 1 point off the lead, and you've got 2 legs to come. one very short one, relatively short one, haven't you? And one, I won't call it a lottery, that would be unfair, but it's one of a great deal of uncertainty as you go through the med, isn't it? They're two very different legs now.
Yeah, so this will feel like a real short sprint, the next leg that's coming up from Aarhus to The Hague, effectively sort of 3 full days at sea. Lots of coastline to negotiate, lots of wind farms, shallow areas. So yeah, I think it's going to be a very much a sprint race, very much the watch systems kind of will be out the window, and it will be all hands on deck, just trying to keep the performance and sail changes, what have you. So yeah, a full-on leg followed by a longer leg, but as you said, it's going to be a mishmash of everything, you know, potentially heavy winds through the Bay of Biscay, lots of tide to negotiate around that coastline, and then the med could just throw up anything at this time of year. So yeah, it could be a full re-race start if there's any park-ups in the med. And
I guess there's quite a lot of pressure. I mean, there's bound to be pressure on you anyway because you're 1 point off the lead, but a tie break would, if it came to that, would potentially come down to the import racing, and your track record there hasn't been as good. So I guess, does that mean that there's more pressure on you to make sure that you get the job done on the offshore legs?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, you'd like to think it was a clean race pointed off the offshore racing only, and ultimately that's what this race is about, racing around the world. So it would be a bit of a shame if it came down to inshore points, and yeah, it hasn't been our hot spot. But it is what it is. I guess we've got to try our best now for the final 2 legs, and yeah, as you said, the pressure's on a little bit, but equally the top 3 boats are all going to be feeling that pressure, so it's just who can sail smart, safe, fast, and yeah, cross that line first.
And of course in the last race it came down to the last jibe, didn't it? I mean, it was incredible.
Yeah.
So I know the race isn't over yet, far from it, but looking back on the brutal bits, well, not just the brutal bits, but looking back on the legs, 5 legs so far, what really for you personally, what really stands out? What will you take away from this thinking, well, I don't know what you think, but...
I think having done leg 3, I mean, that was always a kind of a massive question mark over the length of the leg and just the living conditions on board, and whether personally I could get through a leg of that magnitude. So I think that's a personal goal to have ticked it off. I think a race like this, it just builds your resilience up. You certainly find just new barriers on your physical and mental limits, and I think that's probably why I love this race so much. It is a challenge. I love the challenge. And it's great to have come away with sailing with such a great team, and to have pulled off a 24-hour record on that leg 3, and then again on leg 5. I mean, it's just been fantastic and almost a new sailing experience on these IMOCA boats.
Very much so. And leg 3, you say you didn't know whether you could do it, and I had heard through the grapevine that you had your doubts as to whether you were really up for it to start with, but was it, I hesitate to say easier, but did you come away with a lot more confidence out of it, or did you come away saying, right, well, I'm glad I've done that, tick, never again?
It's definitely not something that you rush back to because it takes a lot out of you. But certainly it could have been a hell of a lot worse from the weather conditions point of view. I think the wind gods were looking down on us in terms of that first sort of 2-3 weeks where it was relatively benign conditions for the Southern Ocean. We really got ourselves battered around just before Cape Horn, and again coming into Itajaí. But yeah, a leg of that length really takes it out of you physically, and it probably wasn't until I stepped ashore that I realised quite how tired I was. But a huge achievement to have done that.
And does it change your view on what it must be like for the Vendée Globe people?
I still think they're mad. I mean,
it hasn't tempted you to say, do you know what, I did that, I could probably go the extra distance.
No, I've never have had any compunction to sail solo. For me, it's team sailing. I really love, getting the most out of a boat, having that camaraderie, that the ability to bounce ideas off everyone, and everyone has a different skill set to bring to the table. And for me, no chance.
Well, that's pretty clear cut. Brilliant. Well done so far. Good luck going forwards, and thanks very much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Abby.